Long ago, in a quiet African village surrounded by tall baobab trees, life moved slowly and peacefully. Farmers worked in the fields while children played in the dusty roads. Among the villagers lived a poor farmer named Kofi. He owned almost nothing, but he worked harder than anyone else in the village. Many villagers laughed at Kofi. They mocked his old clothes and his broken tools, believing that a poor man could never become successful. African farmer working alone in a small farm under the bright sun, digging the soil with simple tools. But Kofi never complained. Every morning before the sun rose, he went to his small farm and worked with patience and determination. One year, something terrible happened. The rains stopped. Weeks passed, and the land slowly began to dry. Farmers standing sadly. The rivers shrank, the crops died, and hunger slowly began to spread across the village. Even the wealthy farmers who once laughed at Kofi began to worry. Their large farms had completely failed. One evening, the village chief called everyone together under the great baobab tree to discuss how they would survive. Suddenly, an old woman stood up and spoke. She suggested that perhaps Kofi might know what to do. The villagers laughed loudly again. How could the poorest man in the village possibly save them? But Kofi stepped forward calmly, explaining and tell them what to do, and everyone was quiet. Months passed by. Hidden behind the hills was a large field of strong, healthy yams, enough food to feed the entire village. The chief looked at Kofi with respect and said, "Today, the poorest man has saved the richest village." From that day forward, the villagers never mocked Kofi again. They learned a lesson that would be told for generations. Never laugh at a humble man, because wisdom often hides in simple clothes. After the great drought, everything changed. The villagers who once laughed at Kofi now greeted him with respect wherever he went. But even after saving the village, Kofi remained the same humble man. He still lived in his small house and worked on his farm every day. As the years passed, the village chief grew old and weak. He began thinking about who would lead the village after him. The villagers began to discuss who should become their next leader. One evening, the chief called everyone together under the great baobab tree. "My time as chief is coming to an end," he said slowly. "The village must choose a wise leader." Suddenly, one farmer stood up and said, "The man who saved our village should lead us." Slowly, the crowd began to agree. One by one, the villagers all spoke the same name. Humble farmer Kofi, looking surprised and humble, while villagers looked at him with respect. The chief walked toward Kofi and placed the ceremonial staff in his hands. Kofi standing proudly but humbly before villagers, holding the leadership. Kofi ruled with wisdom and kindness, always listening to the people. Kofi discussing farming plans. Under his leadership, farms growing successfully, the village grew stronger, and the harvest became plentiful. Years later, elders told the children the story of the poor farmer who became their greatest leader. Peaceful African village sunset scene with farmers walking through green fields. And the lesson remained forever. Never judge a person by their wealth, because true wisdom often comes from the humblest hearts. The end.